It was the kind of evening that corporate retreats were made for. Light-hearted stories, drinks flowing, laughter bouncing off the wooden beams of a cozy lodge nestled somewhere in upstate New York. The company had booked the whole place for the weekend. A team-building retreat, they called it, but everyone knew it was more about drinks, hookups, and pretending to bond outside of office hours. Among the crowd sat Rachel, sharp, ambitious, respected, and her husband, Mark. They'd arrived just a bit late, enough that most of the seating was already claimed. So when Rachel took a spot beside Mark and across from a tall, well-groomed newcomer named Tyler, it didn't raise any red flags. Not yet. Tyler was the firm's newest legal associate. He had that polished charm, the kind that made people, especially women, lean in when he spoke. This was his first company retreat. Mark had come more out of instinct than interest. Rachel had only mentioned the trip a day before, said it was a spontaneous addition, something her manager insisted on last minute. That alone had made Mark pause. Still, he'd arranged for their two sons, 13 and 14, to spend the weekend with Rachel's parents and told her he'd come along. Rachel hadn't objected, but she hadn't looked thrilled either. The bus ride up was quiet. Mark kept mostly to himself, recognizing a few faces from the annual Christmas party, where he usually stood in the background. When they arrived, everyone was assigned a room. People scattered to freshen up, unpack, and explore. Not long after settling in, Rachel stepped outside, saying she wanted some fresh air. Mark waited a minute, then followed her out onto the porch. What he saw there made something in his gut tighten. Rachel stood under the string lights, smiling, laughing, her body turned just slightly toward Tyler. The way they talked, too casual, too close, wasn't exactly scandalous, but it was enough to stir suspicion. He wasn't the only one who noticed. A younger employee named Katie had stepped out with a drink and paused beside Mark. She nodded toward Rachel and Tyler, then said quietly, "There's no full-blown affair yet, but there's definitely chemistry." Mark turned his head slightly. "You sure?" Katie gave a half-smile. "Let's just say it's pretty clear. She keeps reviewing his compliance paperwork, even though it's not her department anymore." Mark frowned. "And his wife?" "She works in finance. Different company. I've seen her once. Pretty woman." Katie glanced at her watch. "Anyway, I've got to get back. My husband's waiting for me." "You?" He gave a measured smile. "I'm Mark, Rachel's husband." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, well, good luck." And with that, she disappeared back inside. Mark remained where he was for a long moment, the chill of the evening barely registering. That moment on the porch, that was when it began. That evening, the group gathered again in the main hall for dinner and drinks. The vibe was looser now. Wine bottles had been opened, beer was flowing, and the music had been turned up just enough to cover private conversations. Mark wasn't drinking much, just a beer, maybe two. But Rachel noticed. With a teasing smile, she leaned in and said, "Tonight, you can drink as much as you want, honey. Go wild. I won't stop you." Mark gave a short laugh. "That sounds generous." She raised her glass. "Just don't bring the hangover home." The tone was playful, but something in her eyes, calculated. Like she was encouraging him to lose control, like she wanted him out of the way. Tyler, meanwhile, seemed to always be nearby, laughing too loudly at her jokes, leaning in when she spoke, creating that subtle but unmistakable us versus them bubble that two people form when they share a secret. Mark knew the kind. He'd seen it before, in other couples. Never thought he'd see it with his own wife. And then he remembered something. Tyler was staying in a second-floor room, just a few doors down from theirs. He watched as Rachel and Tyler launched into a discussion about work, code policies, contracts. Mark quietly joined the conversation, asking a few innocent questions about where Tyler had studied. Columbia Law, he claimed. "Funny," Mark said. "Rachel and I both went to Columbia, though years apart." Tyler smiled, nodded. "So tell me," Mark said casually, "is Professor Lundy still teaching business ethics? Guy gave me hell back in the day." Tyler hesitated. "Oh, I think he retired right before I started." That wasn't true. Lundy had retired just last year. Mark didn't let it show on his face, but inside, everything clicked. Tyler had never set foot in Colombia, and Rachel, the detail-obsessed perfectionist, hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. Later that night, as people began filtering out of the hall to their rooms, Rachel leaned in again. "Well, come on, Mr. Lightweight," she teased. "Let me walk you to your room before you collapse." Tyler stood up too. "I can help." Mark raised his hand. "I'm good. I'm not drunk." Rachel blinked. "Seriously?" "I had 2 beers." "But you drank so much." Mark smiled. "Yeah, that's what I let you think." She gave a confused, slightly annoyed look, but didn't argue. Tyler mumbled something about turning in for the night and walked off toward the stairs. Rachel and Mark followed a minute later. They went to bed. The lights went off, but Mark didn't sleep. And when Rachel quietly slipped out of bed, put on her hoodie, and tiptoed toward the door, he opened his eyes and asked softly, "Can't sleep?" She paused, startled. "Just getting some fresh air." "I'll come with you." She hesitated for a second too long, but then she smiled. "Sure." The night air was crisp. Pine trees framed the edge of the lodge's yard, and somewhere in the dark, a small creek whispered through the woods. Rachel stepped out first, wrapping her arms around herself as if the cold surprised her. Mark followed quietly behind. On the porch, seated casually on a wooden bench under the soft glow of a porch light, was Tyler. A cigarette hung from his lips, and his posture relaxed, maybe too relaxed. His face brightened when he saw Rachel. But when Mark stepped through the door behind her, Tyler's smile faltered. He quickly straightened up, flicking ash into a nearby can. "Couldn't sleep either?" Mark asked, his tone even. Tyler nodded, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, figured I'd grab a smoke before bed." "Bad habit," Mark said with a half smile. "Kills you slow." Tyler gave a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, I know. I only smoke when I'm stressed, or drunk." "Those are the worst times to do it," Mark replied, casually stepping a little closer. Rachel stayed quiet, her body language closed. Mark noticed that too. After a moment, he turned back to Tyler. "So, why didn't you bring your wife on this trip? Seemed like a good getaway." Tyler looked up, surprised. "How do you?" "Oh," Mark said, nodding toward Rachel. "She didn't mention it. I just figured someone like you wouldn't be traveling solo." Tyler scratched his neck, suddenly looking very sober. "She couldn't make it. Family stuff. She's with her parents this week." Mark kept his eyes on him. "Ah, that's too bad. My boys are with their grandparents too. Would have been nice to have the whole crew here. Kind of a family thing, you know?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably beside him. Tyler stubbed out his cigarette. "Well, I should get to bed. Early morning." "I'm sure," Mark said softly. Without waiting for a response, Tyler disappeared back inside. Rachel stood there, silent. The porch lights hummed in the quiet. Mark didn't look at her. He just walked a few steps toward the yard and said calmly, "You looked surprised when I mentioned his wife." She didn't answer. "Don't worry," he added. "I'm not accusing you of anything. Yet." Rachel folded her arms. "You're reading into things that aren't there." Mark turned to face her, his voice lower. "You sure about that?" No answer. He looked at her for another long second, then headed back inside. She followed a few paces behind. That night, they slept in the same bed, but the space between them felt like a canyon. By morning, everything felt normal, or at least performed as normal. People gathered for breakfast, luggage was hauled into the bus, and the cheerful rhythm of departure masked the tension that had never left Mark's chest. Rachel moved through the motions with practiced grace, laughing at a coworker's joke, thanking the event coordinator, taking photos on her phone. But every now and then she glanced at Mark, just to check if he was watching. He always was. The ride back to the city was quiet. Rachel sat by the window, earbuds in. Mark didn't say much. When the bus passed by her parents' house to pick up their kids, their two sons ran out with bright smiles and weekend stories about fishing, card games, and late-night movies with Grandma. Rachel lit up like nothing had ever happened. Back home, she made dinner while Mark helped the boys organize their science project kits. Their youngest was trying to wire a potato to light up a tiny bulb. For a while, everything felt almost okay. Until the boys mentioned something over dinner. "Grandma said mushrooms are everywhere in the woods this year," the older one said between bites. "She even cooked some up for breakfast." Mark looked at Rachel. She froze mid-chew. "You fed them mushrooms?" she asked sharply. "Relax," Mark said. "They were fine. It was one of the few meals they didn't complain about." Rachel set her fork down. "My mom should know better. Wild mushrooms aren't safe for kids." "She's been cooking them for 50 years, Mark replied calmly. "I think she knows which ones are poisonous." The boys giggled, but Rachel didn't smile. The moment lingered longer than it should have. After dinner, the kids asked about going to Grandma's country house next weekend to pick mushrooms, catch frogs, sleep in a tent. Mark smiled. "Why not? If we leave now, we'll be there before midnight." Rachel blinked. "What? You have work tomorrow?" "I've got PTO saved up," he replied, "and 10 days of unused time." 5 minutes later, he was already texting his manager. The boys whooped and ran to pack. Rachel stayed seated. When Mark finally sat down again, plate cleared, voice quiet but steady, he looked across the table at her and said, "I'm not a fool, Rachel. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know what didn't happen only because I was there." She stared at him. "You like Tyler," he continued. "You tried to keep me away from that trip, and everything you planned fell apart because I showed up." Rachel's mouth opened slightly. "You seriously think I'm not asking you to explain," Mark interrupted. "Don't insult both of us. I don't need proof. I don't need you to confess. What I need is space." Her voice cracked a little. "Mark." "I'm taking the boys for the week," he said flatly. "What happens when I get back depends on you." He stood up. "You'll have time to think, so will I. And if Tyler shows up in our house while I'm gone, don't worry, I'll know." She sat frozen in her chair. The door clicked softly behind him. The house felt too big when it was empty. The first night without Mark and the boys, Rachel poured herself a glass of wine and tried to watch something, anything, to drown out the silence. But every show felt fake, every laugh track irritating. After 10 minutes, she muted the TV and just stared at her reflection in the black screen. She wasn't used to stillness. Usually, the evenings were full of noise. The boys arguing over video games, Mark humming while washing dishes, the dishwasher running, the dog barking at shadows. Now, nothing. She opened her phone. No new messages. Mark hadn't texted. The boys hadn't either. She thought about sending something. "Miss you. Everything okay?" But she didn't. Because deep down, she knew why he left. She tried to sleep, but her brain wouldn't shut off. Her own voice, the one that usually justified everything, had gone quiet. All that remained was the echo of things left unsaid. By the third day, she started imagining scenarios. What if Mark had already seen something? What if Katie, the coworker who liked to gossip, had said something? What if Tyler had bragged, or worse, lied about something that hadn't even happened? And then there was the scariest thought of all. What if Mark believed something happened and decided to act on that belief, regardless of whether it was true? Her mind raced in circles. She opened Instagram and scrolled through Tyler's feed. Nothing suspicious. She clicked on Mark's profile. No updates, just the same old photos of fishing trips and birthday cakes. That night, she called her best friend, Lauren. "Do you think," Rachel asked slowly, "a person can cheat emotionally? Like, if they didn't actually do anything, but something was almost there?" Lauren's pause was long. "Depends," she finally said. "If you have to ask, then you probably already know the answer." Rachel didn't respond. Mark and the boys returned on Sunday evening, just as the sky began to turn purple with dusk. The minivan pulled into the driveway, caked with a week's worth of country dust and mud, and Rachel came out to meet them, forcing a smile that felt stiff on her face. The kids ran ahead, showing off pine cones and handmade slingshots from the woods. She hugged them tightly, inhaling the familiar smell of campfire smoke and shampoo. Mark trailed behind, carrying their bags, quiet but polite. "Dinner's in the oven," she offered. He nodded. "Thanks." They sat at the table like they had hundreds of times before. Pasta, salad, garlic bread. The boys talked non-stop. Mark listened, asked questions, smiled occasionally. Rachel tried to join in, but her rhythm was off, like she was speaking a language she hadn't used in months. After the boys went upstairs to unpack, Rachel lingered in the kitchen, wiping an already clean counter. Mark walked in behind her, setting his glass in the sink. She turned. "They missed you." "They had a great time," he replied, his voice calm. Silence settled between them, heavy, uncertain. "I didn't see Tyler," she said quietly. "I didn't ask. I haven't spoken to him since that weekend." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "That's not something you tell someone to reassure them. That's something you say when you're afraid of losing control of the story." Rachel swallowed hard. "Nothing happened." "I know," Mark said. That surprised her. "You believe me?" "I believe that nothing happened," he clarified. "I also believe that something almost did, and that, for a while, you wanted it to." She looked down. Mark continued, voice steady. "You let the boundaries slide. You kept secrets. You tested the water. And the only reason you're still standing in this kitchen right now is because I showed up when I wasn't supposed to." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. "What now?" she asked. Mark leaned on the counter. "Now, we parent. We coexist. We go to work. We go to sleep. Maybe, if we're lucky, we figure out what we still are." Rachel took a deep breath, nodded once. That night, they lay in the same bed, but didn't touch. Just like the silence she lived in all week, he had brought his own, and it was colder. The days that followed blurred into routine. Work, dinner, homework, sleep. Mark kept his tone warm with the kids, patient, present. He helped with projects, packed lunches, even volunteered for a school field trip. In public, he looked like a model husband, but behind closed doors, he was a ghost. No arguments, no accusations, just distance and indifference. The kind of silence that doesn't punish, it erases. Rachel noticed everything. The way he no longer asked how her day went. The way he moved through the house like a quiet visitor. The way he took his phone with him into the bathroom now and double-checked the front door before going to bed, as if he didn't fully trust the lock, or her. One night, a few weeks later, after the kids had gone to sleep, Rachel walked into the living room where Mark was reading. She stood there for a moment, arms crossed, heart pounding. "I miss you," she said softly. He looked up from his book. "I'm right here." "You know that's not what I mean." Mark closed the book gently, marked the page, and placed it on the coffee table. "What do you want me to say, Rachel? That I'm over it? That everything's fine?" "I want to know if you still love me." He didn't respond right away. Then, after a long pause, "I think I love the memory of who we were, but I don't know who you are right now." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never crossed the line, Mark." "You stood at the edge of it, repeatedly, and smiled at the view." That line hit her like a slap. She stepped forward, reached for his hand, but he gently pulled away. "You made a choice," he said quietly. "Not to cheat, but to lie, to hide, to enjoy attention that didn't belong to you. And now you want comfort from the man you almost threw away." Rachel wiped her cheek, furious at herself for crying. "So what now? Are you punishing me forever?" "No," he said. "I'm grieving, quietly, like a grown man." He stood up and walked past her, leaving her alone in the room with her guilt, her silence, and a sinking feeling in her chest. Some things, once broken, don't come back. Fall came early that year. The trees turned gold overnight, and the wind had that crisp edge that hinted winter wasn't far behind. It had been 2 months since the retreat. Mark still lived in the house, still made coffee in the morning, still loaded the dishwasher after dinner, still said goodnight to the kids, asked about homework, folded laundry on Sundays. But the version of him that had once been Rachel's home, that man was gone. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't seek revenge. He simply stopped offering her access to his heart. Rachel tried everything. She booked therapy, started packing him lunch again, suggested weekend plans, bought new lingerie, smiled more, laughed louder, but it was like trying to warm herself with ashes. He was kind, he was present, but he was no longer hers. Then one night, after dinner, Mark sat down across from her at the kitchen table. He looked calm, rested, certain. "I've been offered a position in Chicago," he said. "It's remote, mostly, but they'd want me there in person twice a month." Rachel's stomach dropped. "And you want to take it?" He nodded. "I already accepted." She looked down. "And us?" "I think we'll do better," he said gently, "as co-parents." She swallowed hard. "So that's it?" Mark stood up, walked to the cupboard, poured himself a glass of water. Then he looked back at her and said, "You were the one who left. I just stayed long enough to make it official." And that was all. He didn't slam the door. He didn't pack in a rush. He waited for the boys to fall asleep. Then he took a duffel bag, loaded his laptop, a few shirts, and left with the same quiet he had carried for weeks. Rachel stood in the kitchen for a long time. Not crying, not shouting, just existing in the emptiness she helped create. No scandal, no screaming, just the sound of a man finally choosing peace over a second betrayal.